In this section, we will start working with our main project. We will create this project using MVC and not Razor Pages so that we'll understand both of the concepts. Then the first thing that we have to do is we need to understand the MVC structure and the MVC architecture. So we'll take a look at that first, and then we'll start making small changes for this section. So let's get started with that. In this video, we will start working on our project, which is Spice Restaurant. So first we have to create a new project. I am using Visual Studio 2017. In future, they have already announced the preview for Visual Studio 2019. So it might be available in near future, in which I will update how the UI looks like for the project creation. But for now, in 2017, you'll go to File, New, Project. Here, we will select the ASP.NET Core Web Application, and then we'll browse to the folder where we want to create it. So we'll go to Desktop, we'll go to the Udemy course, and here, let me create a new folder for Spice. We'll select this folder, and we'll call the application as Spice as well. Once that is done, we'll click the OK button, and with that we see number of options that are available to us. One of the most important thing is you have to select ASP.NET Core 2.2. So we'll select that, and we will select the web application with Model View Controller. Then we'll change the authentication here, and we'll select the individual user's account. And this is because we want ASP.NET to configure identity for us so that we do not have to do that manually. Now, of course, you can make any tweaks that you want, and we will be tweaking this identity in future as we progress with the course, but this is something for us to get started with. So we'll select individual user's account, click the OK button, and click OK to create the project. Great, so the project has been created. It will take a while to load all the dependencies. If you expand here, we have NuGet, and inside NuGet, right now we have the Microsoft ASP.NET Core app, which is 2.2, and we also have the Razor design. So this looks great for the project creation. Now here, since it's an MVC project, we have controllers, views, and models. We'll take a look at this folder in the next video. In this video, we will be creating our new project. The Spice project that we will be creating will be using Visual Studio 2019 because we'll be creating using ASP.NET Core 3.0. The first thing when you open up Visual Studio is on the right hand side, you have the Get Started options, and you will select Create a New Project. In here, we have multiple templates that are available. We want to select ASP.NET Core Web Application. If you do not see this, you can search for the template here as well. Once you select this, we'll hit the Next button, and we need a project name here. Let's call this Spice, and the location looks good. You can change this if you want. I will keep it the same. Then we'll hit the Create button, and we'll have to configure more options for our project. Here we have multiple templates that are available. The first one is an empty template, then we have an API project, a web application project, which will be based on Razor Pages. Lastly here we have the web application, which is Model Views and Controller. All other that we have are JavaScript frameworks, but we do not need that. We will go with the Model View and Controller because MVC is the route we want for this project. One of the most important thing is to make sure that we have .NET Core here, and the framework is .NET Core 3.0. After that, we have the authentication on the right hand side. Here we want to select individual user's account. When you select individual user's account, it will set up identity within your project, and it will add the identity tables automatically when you push the migration for the first time. Now, if migration and entity framework does not ring any bells or sound too complicated, do not worry, just think about this. that selecting this option will configure the individual user's account authentication to your project. Once you have this, we'll click the OK button and we'll hit the Create button next. But before you hit the Create, make sure you do all of the changes that I have selected here. If you do not do that, or if you skip that, the project will be different than what we'll be building in this course. Once everything looks good, let's hit the Create button. Perfect. So with this, the project has been created. It was still loading the dependencies, but now if you expand this and if you go on packages, it already has added few packages for our project. Now in the next video, let's understand the differences that we see here versus the first project that we created. In this video, let's understand the architecture of MVC application. MVC stands for Model, Views and Controller, and that is how the application will be divided. Since we have 3 pieces in an MVC application, it's best to take a look at them individually. First, we have the model. Model represents the data and it is independent of the controller or the view. For example, if you think about all the tables you want in your project, there will be a model for each table. There are more complications like any programming languages, but we will keep it simple for now and we will deal with the complexities once we get inside the course details. So right now an example of a model could be a book, a menu item, a category, an order header or order detail. Every table that you have inside your database will have a corresponding model class inside your model folder. So every model would be a table and the properties of that model would correspond to the columns of the table. Next, what we have is view. Views are the components that display the application user interface. View represents what the end user sees on the UI or how he sees the web page. In our application, we will be using Razor framework, which would integrate C# along with HTML. We will also take a look at new concepts in ASP.NET Core, which is tag helpers. So whenever we talk about front end, we would be talking about the views. Lastly, we have the controllers. Controllers is the heart of the application, which handles user interaction. They are the set of classes that handles the communication from the user. Whenever we click a button in MVC, a controller action will be invoked and it would process all the incoming requests. One important thing to remember is that all the main programming or logic of your application, like what happens when a user clicks a button, will reside inside the controller and its action methods. Now let's take a look at the flow in an MVC application. Whenever any web request comes to a controller, it will be invoking an action inside that controller. That will update the data if needed and pass the data by either fetching it or updating it to the view. View would then display all the data that it receives from the controller and it will get the values from the model that will be passed by the controller. This is a generic overview of an MVC application, and as we proceed with the application, this will become much more familiar. But at basics, you should always remember that whenever something is clicked, first a controller will be invoked, which will manipulate the data and it will pass that to the view. View can then fetch the data from the model, or it can directly display what controller is asking it to. We will understand this in much more details as we proceed with the course, so do not worry if you're scratching your head right now. Just stay with me and I'll make sure that by the end of the course, you will have this by heart. In this video, we will be understanding how routing works in an MVC application. So for that, the application that we have inside startup.cs class file, if you scroll down, we have app.useRouting and we have app.useEndpoints. This endpoint routing has been introduced with ASP.NET Core 3. Here with endpoint routing at the end, we have more than one routes in our application. We have Razor pages, we have controllers with routes as well. If you want, we can also add SignalR to the project and it will add one more route here. So that's why we have endpoint routing in which you can have more than one routing pattern. The MVC routing pattern has been shown here in the first section where we have endpoints.mapControllerRoute. Before we understand this in more details, let's understand what routing is. Routing basically defines that based on the URL that we type, what page should be fetched and displayed. Routing in MVC is different than what we used to have for classic.NET. In order to understand this, let's see the big picture here. In the diagram here, we see a basic flow for routing. ASP.NET routing is a pattern matching which enables you to match the incoming request to a particular MVC action defined in a controller. When ASP.NET routing engine receives request at runtime, it finds a match against that requested URL against the URL pattern defined in the route table. If any match is found, then it forwards that request to the controller. Otherwise, it will return a 404 not found. When we create a new ASP.NET Core MVC application, routes are already added to the project. That will be an overview of how the route engine and the URL pattern works. Let's take a look at few examples so we can understand this further. Here we have two examples and you can see I have highlighted the path. The first path is localhost 1234/book/index/2. By default, the first one after the localhost is controller name followed by action and an ID. ID can be an optional field. In the example you see below is an example with areas. When you use areas in the project, it adds one more layer to the routing. I will explain in more details what areas is in just a second, but first let's understand the basic routing with controller and action and parameters. Here we have few examples. Based on that, I have displayed what would be the controller name and what would be the action name. Let me come back to this in a while. Let's switch to our application. Right now, let me run the application so I can show you how the routing comes into picture. Right now you see the home page is loading, and this home page we do not see anything after the local host. In here, if we go back to the application inside Solution Explorer, inside the controller, we have the home controller. And let me just pin this. Whoops. View, I need the Solution Explorer. Let me pin this. Inside the home controller, you see we have index action and privacy action. Let me add debuggers here. And if we go back and we just refresh the page without anything after the local host, you see it goes to the index action inside the home controller. And that is because inside startup, we have set the default route to home controller and index action. So that's why if you just have home and index, it will bring you to the home page. Now here, if you type home and index, it will again bring you to the same method of index or same action of index inside the home controller. Let's hit continue here, and you can see it's the same page but just different URL, because now we are explicitly defining go to the home controller and the index action. What happens when you click on privacy? On the left hand side bottom, you can see the URL is home/privacy. So home will be the controller name. So if we go to controller, we have the home controller. In that, it should go to the privacy action method. So if we go back and if we click on privacy, great, you can see the control is coming right here. Once the control comes here, we have return view. What happens when you click on return view? It tries to find the corresponding view for this action method, and that will be inside views folder. The subfolder will be the same name as the controller name, which is home, and inside that the page name will be the same as the action method, so it will load the privacy page. If you double click on privacy, and then once you hit continue, it will load the privacy page. Perfect, so this is working as expected. So you can see how the basic routing is working with the controller and the action method. So now we know some basic terminology. Within a controller, we have action methods, and those action methods will have corresponding views inside the views folder. If we go back to the presentation, now this will make much more sense. The first URL that you see is localhost/home, in that only the controller home is defined. We do not have any action. But the default we have already said it will be index, so the action will be index and ID will be null. Then the next one is home/index/123, in which the controller is home, the action will be index, and ID will be 123. You can see all the others follow the same pattern. That is the basic routing that comes with MVC. But if we go back, you see we have areas here. And when we have areas, routing will be slightly different. Let's understand that in the next video. In this video, let's understand the areas. In ASP.NET Core, we have something called as areas. Areas can be think about something that will divide your application into multiple crucial components. For example, we have the identity component, which is basically dealing with authorization, registration, login, and managing the customer identity. The next area which we can create could be a customer area. So within the customer area, we will be dealing with customer-facing UI, like a customer can place orders, see a list of items, and so on. Then we have another area which will be admin. Inside admin area, we will be dealing all of the content management. Like you have to add some things on the back end, you have to add new products, display them, edit them or delete them. So all of those admin functionalities, we could separate it out inside the admin area. Now when we add areas, it is not specific that areas should be MVC only. Identity is a Razor class library. So that's why we can mix Razor class library with our MVC application. But with identity, since it's a Razor class library, you do not have controllers and views. With customer and admin areas that we will add, we will have their own controllers and view inside the identity. So if we go back to our project, right now you see we have controllers and views generic like this. Inside areas, once we add customer or admin areas, we will have their controllers moved in the corresponding area. So that way that will act as a nice separation. If you're dealing with anything related to admin, you know that will be inside the admin area. But once we add areas, how will routing be affected? Routing with areas adds another pattern or another route in front of the controller name. Like here in the first one, you can see after localhost, we have identity account register. Identity will be the area name, followed by controller, followed by action method, and if there is any ID, it will be after that. The example is the third example in which we have localhost /admin/category/edit/10. Admin is the area name, followed by controller, which is category. Then we have edit, which is the action name. And finally, we have the number 10, which is the ID. Now, if you add area, you can see the routing needs to be updated as well. So if we go back to the Spice project inside startup, here we will have to add areas. In order to do that, we will be first adding areas. Now that we understand how routing works within areas, in the next video, let's add the few areas that we want and continue from there. In this video, I just want to show you what is the difference in routing between ASP.NET Core 2.2 and ASP.NET Core 3. Right now, our application is .NET Core 3, and if you scroll down in the startup.cs class file, inside the configure method, you see we have app.useRouting and we have app.useEndpoints. I'll just paste a code here which will show what was there with .NET Core 2.2. With 2.2, we had app.useMVC, and then we used to define routes here. Originally, this application was built with 2.2, but I have upgraded it completely. So maybe in any future videos, if you see this routes in the startup.cs, just ignore that. This is what you should always have for routing. In this video, we will be understanding the few differences that we see here as compared to the previous project that we created. The previous project was a course on Razor Pages. This one is based on MVC. The first difference that you see is in the packages itself. By default, we have included Entity Framework Core, SQL Server, ASP.NET Core Identity, and few of the other packages. The reason all of these packages have been included is because you selected individual user's account as authentication, because of which it had to set up Entity Framework as well as identity within your project. If you also double click on the project, inside the project file, you will see the same references for the packages. So this looks well aligned with what we wanted. We have few packages here, but we do not see the Razor compilation project, because of which we can refresh the UI as we saw in the first course. So we'll go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Solution. We'll go to Browse here. And right here, we'll search for Runtime Compilation. There we go, we have the package. Let's add that to the Spice project and hit Install. Perfect, the package has been installed. The change that we have to do is in Startup class file, where we have the Add Razor Pages. We will do Add Runtime Razor Compilation. Because of this, if you will make any change in the views, this will be automatically refreshed when you hit the refresh button and it will be reloaded. If this was not added, you will have to restart your project. Now that we have all the packages that we want for our startup, let's understand the new folders. We have areas, controllers, models, and views. These are the 4 new folders that have been created which were not present in our Razor project. We will take a look at area in a while, but right now let's focus on model, views, and controller. As we saw in the previous video, the importance of controller, models, and views. What we have here is we have a home controller, and if you open that up, you will see we have few of the methods. These methods are called as actions in a controller. We will be using this terminology throughout the course, and it is also a professional terminology, so you should be familiar with this. Every method inside a controller will be an action. We have the constructor on top, and then we have few of the action methods. An action method most of the times has a corresponding view. Like we see the index here, and it is inside the home controller, so inside views you will have a folder with the same name, which is home, as the controller name. Inside this, we'll have the views for the action methods. We have index and privacy here, and you see the same view names for index and privacy. What this means is when this action is called and when we say return view, it will yield the index view. We will understand this in more details in the routing, but I hope this is making some sense right now that if a control goes to the index action method, it will do some processing if it has to. If not, it returns to the view. What view does it returns to? It goes in the views folder with the controller name, which is home controller, and looks for the same name, which is the action name, which is the index page. So all the UI component you will be adding inside the views folder. We have the shared views here, which contains the partial views which are shared across the application. Underscore layout is the master page for your application. Then we have the view import and view start, which we saw in the Razor course as well. Inside the controllers, we'll be adding new controllers, and when we'll add new controller, we will be adding folder inside the views as well. Models represents the table name. So for all the tables that you'll have inside your database, you will have a class inside models. We will be also having view models, which is a combination of models, but I will explain that once we have the requirement of why we need a view model. So this was a brief overview of all the new files and folders that you see in an MVC application. We still have not covered areas, but we will cover that inside routing. In this video, we will be adding areas to our project. So on the areas folder, we'll right click, add a new area here, and let's call this customer. Once we add customer, it installs few of the NuGet packages because it has to scaffold few things. Within the customer area, it will have its own views, models, and other folders. Great, right here you see we have a scaffolded for README that once you add area, you have to change the routes. Here it displays app.useMVC, but we are using .NET Core 3, because of which we no longer need use MVC. We will be using the endpoint routing. So let me close this, and in the endpoint, we have to add here area is equal to customer /. So now we first have the area, then the controller, and action name. If you see in the Solution Explorer, inside customer, it has scaffolded few folders for us. We have controllers, data, models, and views. So right here, what we can do is we can use all of the folders, but I think that is too overcomplicated. The models should be shared across the application as well as the data. So all we will do inside the customer area is we'll have its own controllers and its own views. So I'll remove the models and we'll remove the data. Once we remove that, let me add another area. This area will be for the admin section and will be dealing with all of the content management inside the admin area. Perfect, we don't need the scaffold again. Inside the admin, we'll remove the data and models. Now we have a nice separation within our areas. We have admin, customer, and identity. With that, we have to move our home controller as well as the views for home controller inside the customer area because that is the home page. So let's do that in the next video. In this video, what we will do is we will move our home controller and the home views inside the areas that we created. The home controller we have to move inside customers. So we'll drag the controller inside the controllers folder inside the customer area. We'll add this, and then we also have to do the same for the view folder, which is the home view. We'll be moving that inside the views of customer area. Once we add this, anytime you add a new controller inside areas, by default it will not add what area this controller belongs to. So on top of the controller, you have to add the area, and you have to define that within a double quotes that this home controller is inside the customer area. If you do not do this, it will give an error message and it won't be able to find the home controller. Once you add that, inside the views main folder, we have view import and view start. We need to copy them inside the views folder as well, because based on that, we'll be able to use tag helpers and the underscore layout page as the master page. We'll do the same inside admin. We'll paste them and we'll open the view start. In here, the master page is underscore layout, but that page does not exist within the same folder. It is actually at the root level. We have to go to views, shared, and then we have the underscore layout. So right here, we'll go to the root folder. We have views, shared, underscore layout dot CSHTML. There we go. We'll copy this and we'll paste it inside the view start for customer as well. So these are all the changes that you had to do to make sure areas are working in your project. We also have identity area, which was there by default. And in here, you won't see any of the pages or the folders because this is a Razor class library, and we'll be dealing with this once we get into those details. Let's run our project and let's see after areas how the application looks. Okay, this is running as expected. If you go on privacy, the URL you'll notice is different now. Now you see a customer area that is added to the URL. This was not there before, so we can see our areas are working. If you go on register, you will see the identity area, and this was always added because this area was created by the scaffolding of ASP.NET Identity, which we added when we said we want to use individual user account for our authentication when we created the project. So with this, we have areas working in our project and everything is well aligned. Now, before we start making any changes on the UI, I want to set up the database for our application. And what we will be using will be SQL Server. So the database connection string will reside inside the app-settings.json file. So if you open this file up, the connection string will already be there. Let me hide this. Now the reason connection string is here is because when we created application, we selected individual users as authentication. So that's why Microsoft has configured this connection string. So this is the connection string that has already been created. You can see the database name is quite long. So let me just shorten that out. I'll just call this Spice. And trusted connection is true and everything looks good. Now, in order to push this to our database, we need to apply migrations. Now, since you know we'll be following the code first methodology, so we will not be making any changes to the database directly. We'll be making them on the code here and they will be applied to our database. So since we have the connection string and the database name set here, let's go ahead and create this database. Before that, let me switch to SQL Server so I can show you a few things there. So this is the SQL Server 2017 that I'm using. You can work with any version, that is not an issue, but you have to make sure the server name here. So when you connect, if we go back to our project, you see the server name is local MS SQL DB. So when you go here, you need to make sure that the server name is exactly the same, because many times what can happen is you can have multiple server names. So students are connecting to the wrong server and then they say that I do not see the database. And that is because you have connected to the wrong server. So whenever you don't see the database, make sure that the server name here is where actually you are connecting inside the SQL Server Management Studio. Here, if we expand the databases, you see we do not have any Spice database right now. Let me go back, and here we have to run the migrations. So in order to do that, we'll go to Tools, we'll go to the NuGet Package Manager, and we'll open the Package Manager console. With the Package Manager, what you typically do is first you have to add a migration whenever you add any changes to the database, and then you hit Update Database. But in our scenario, we'll just do the Update Database. And that is because if we take a look at the Solution Explorer, let me make sure this finish first so then I can explain you. Okay, the migration has been applied. Now the reason we did not add a migration here is because if you take a look at the data folder inside migrations, we already had two migrations. If you take a look at the create identity schema, it is creating ASP.NET roles, ASP.NET users, and couple of more roles and users table. Now these tables are created because we selected individual users account as the identity authentication. So Microsoft has configured this already for us. So if we go to our SQL Server now, and if we hit refresh here, we'll go to the database. We have the Spice database, and inside tables, we'll have the identity tables, which are ASP.NET users. So this is how we have the identity automatically built in by Microsoft for us. Now, if you want to configure this identity, or if you want to start from scratch for this identity, that can take a course by itself. But Microsoft has already provided, and you can customize this as you wish. So it's not like if you use this, you are constrained. You can use it as you wish. You can add more fields, you can add roles, you can do as many things as you want here. So with this, we have added our database and we have added the migration to create the default tables. Now when I run the application, the background, I don't like that. There is no background image. The navigation bar is all white. So I want to make this dark. Now you should know that with ASP.NET Core 2.2, they are using Bootstrap 4.1. So that means they are with the latest stack of Bootstrap. So what we can do is we can go back to our project. Let's make the nav bar as dark. So we'll go here, we'll go to the Solution Explorer, and you should know that the nav bar resides inside the underscore layout because this is the master page. Now here on top we have the CSS, and in development we are using this CSS, and if it's not development we are using the minified version. So you can differentiate the CSS right here. Similarly, we have the same thing for JavaScripts right here. And if there is any JavaScript which you want to be common, you can just mention it outside the environment block. So let's scroll up, and here we have the navigation bar, which is right here. What we want to do is make it dark. So instead of navbar light, let's make it dark, and the background, let's also make it dark. Let's save this. Let's go back and refresh and see how things look like. Great, the navbar is dark, but you can see the text are in black, so it's difficult to read. So let's go back, and if we scroll down, we have the home and privacy. So we'll just remove the text dark from here. If we save it, go back and refresh. Great, we see they are visible now. We need to do the same for the login and register on the right hand side here. But if we go here, you will see that we do not have the login and register here. And that is because they reside inside the identity. So we have the identity inside the areas, and they reside inside the Razor pages. But you can see that we do not have any of the pages here. Now identity has been implemented as a Razor class library by Microsoft, because of which their coding style is based on Razor pages. If you are not familiar with Razor pages, you can take my course on Razor pages to know exactly how they work. But since we have already worked on a small project on Razor pages, you have some idea on how the CRUD operations work with Razor pages. So here we need to include all the pages that we are seeing, like register, login, and all of that. So in order to include them, we'll right click on identity, we'll click add, and we'll select the new scaffolded item. Here we have to select identity. Let's click this. And here you can select a list of few pages, or you can select all of the pages which needs to be scaffolded. Let me go with all of them, but in future, once you are familiar, you can select only the limited amount of pages that you want. Now here on top, it is asking me select an existing layout page or specify a new one. We want to be consistent, so we'll select the same layout page, which is inside the shared folder, and then the data context class. Now this data context class should already be created, which is application DB context, And this is what we use to create the migrations, and this was created because we selected individual user account as the authentication. So with this, we'll hit the add button and it will add all of the pages inside the area's identity. Okay, so scaffolding has been done, and here it gives some directions that you need to do, but we have already done this when we created the project using identity. So we can just ignore this. And then if we go to Solution Explorer, inside pages, now you see account and lots of pages inside manage as well. So now that we have added all of the pages for our identity, we can see that inside manage we have _manage nav and _layout page. So these are the layout pages which it will use for identity, so we'll have to update them as well. But right now our main focus is to change the styling for the register and login button. So for that, we'll just go to our views. We have the shared views and we have the login partial. So here what we have is the register and login. So we'll just remove the text dot from here. Now the pages that we have scaffolded, we'll be working on them in the next videos, but right now let's see how the application looks like. Let's run the application. And perfect, you see login, register, home and privacy. The last thing, I'll also change the footer. So if we go back, here we'll go to the _layout. Right here we have our footer. So what we can do is I'll just add padding. And the text, I want it to be light. So I'll use the text white 50 and we'll use a style. And here we'll use a background color, which is #343A40. And let me also remove this. Let's save this and go back and refresh. And perfect, it is well aligned and everything looks a little bit better with the dark theme that we have. Now here, don't be surprised at this application. This is the final project which we'll be building. I just want to show you a demo so that we are familiar with what we are working with. Now right now you can see there's only shopping cart here, but if I log in through my admin account, I will be able to see more fields here. Right now, do not worry about how authentication works and everything. We'll figure everything out as the time proceeds. But for this video, what we'll be working with managing these fields here. So I just want to show you the content management dropdown. So in content management, we'll be displaying categories, subcategory, menu items, coupons, and users. So how do we implement this dropdown in our navigation bar? So let's switch back to our project and work on this in the _layout page, because that is the master page. So in our application, we'll go to Solution Explorer, _layout page, and we'll scroll down. Now all of this functionality will be done using Bootstrap. So if you want, you can go to the Bootstrap's website, and right here inside the documentation, if you search for dropdown, you will be able to see them with examples right here. So this is something that we want to implement. So what we can do is we can go back to our application, and let me just write this for now. So inside the div, we have the login partial and the home and privacy. Inside the UL tag, we'll create a dropdown. So here we'll have a li, we'll give it a class of nav item, and we'll also give it dropdown, and the color we want to give is text white 50. So inside this, we'll create an action link. We'll give it a class of nav link, dropdown toggle, and we'll give it a href of hash. Then we need to give it an ID, because based on that ID, we'll be toggling the dropdown. So let me do navbar dropdown, dropdown menu link. Then we'll give it a role of button, and we'll use the data toggle attribute, and here we'll say dropdown. After this, we'll use the area, and here we'll use hash popup is equal to true because we need a pop-up, and we'll use the area expanded, whoops, and this will be false. So let me close the a tag here, and we do not want to do anything inside this anchor tag. This will just to display that. So here we want to display content management, and then what will be the content inside that drop down will be inside a div class of drop down menu, and we'll give an area label by, and here we need to copy the exact ID. So that way, once the user clicks here, this will be toggled. And here we need to display all the links. So we'll give a class, we'll use the drop down item. And right here, we don't want to do anything right now. Let me just display category. Let me copy this and paste it a few times. And here we'll have the subcategory. Then we have the menu item. We have coupons, and we have users. Let's save this and let's run our application. Great, we have the drop down and we see category, subcategory, menu item, coupons, and user. So you can see this was nothing fancy. We just used Bootstrap to create a drop down in our menu bar. Let's continue working in the next video.